I have served at 309 formal functions in the 9 years I have worked for the Federation Hospitality Corps. I have carried trays through decompression events and treaty signings, through the hour a warlord died of his own ambitions at a table I had just cleared, through the long gray morning when the Kethvaran Accord finally held, and the assembled delegates wept into their water glasses, and no one thought to feel embarrassed about it. I have learned to be invisible. It is the first skill they teach you at the Corps Training Annex on Plateau Station 7. You are the room's furniture, the air it breathes. You hold the tray level, you keep the glass full, you do not exist. I was not supposed to exist at the wedding of Navigator Sovereign Savarvel Kethasavar. My name is Davin Sale. I am 43 years old. I came to the Hospitality Corps after 12 years on a freight hauling run that stopped being financially viable the year the Kethvaran Corridor Tariff Reform passed, and I took the certification because it was available, and because I was good at standing still and carrying things, and because the work takes you places. Not important places, usually. The annexes and staging rooms of important places. The service passages that run parallel to the halls where things happen, close enough to hear the resonance of large events through composite walls without ever being in the room when they turn. That is the nature of the work. That is what I signed up for 9 years ago, and that is what I have been content with ever since. Nothing in my history prepared me for any of the things that happened in the Velocivar Grand Ceremonial Hall on the 14th day of the 4th month, and I have spent the 18 months since trying to find language for what I witnessed that does not sound like the kind of story a man tells when he wants people to think he is more important than he is. I was not important. I held the tray. The tray held the glasses. The glasses held pale, amber ceremonial wine. That is all I was in that room. A man with a tray and a service identification band on his left wrist, and enough years on his feet at functions to know how to read a room from its periphery. The hall itself is a thing that takes the breath from you the first time you walk into it. I had been briefed, of course. The Corps issues environmental preparation documents before every function of this scale, and I had read the 12-page summary twice the night before in my bunk at the staff annex. Pale limestone columns at 6-meter intervals, vaulted ceiling at 22 meters, dressed stone, carved with 4,000 years of Velocivar dynastic record in a script that runs counterclockwise from the south entrance arch. Morning light through panels of cut mineral stone set into the upper walls, amber and gold, and a pale blue-green that sharpens toward noon into something almost white. Long tables along the east and west walls for the household delegations. A center aisle wide enough for a full diplomatic procession. The stone floor polished to a depth that returns light like still water. At the northern end, the ceremony platform. 3 shallow steps of polished black stone, wide enough to hold a full court assembly, which on this particular morning it did. The briefing document had been thorough about the physical space. It had been less thorough about what it felt like to stand in it, with the light coming down from the mineral panels, and the sound of 300 people finding their positions absorbed almost entirely by the stone. What came back from the walls was not silence, but something very close to it, a low, continuous resonance, like the memory of all the ceremonies that had happened in this room before this one. I had stood in larger halls. I had served at functions with more delegates, more protocol, more elaborate staging. I had never been in a room that felt as old as this one did, or as certain of what it was for. I came in from the service passage at the west side at the start of the pre-ceremony circuit, carrying the second service tray of the refreshment round. 16 glasses of amber ceremonial wine, arranged 4 by 4 on a tray lined in coarse standard white cloth. My left wrist, where the Federation Civilian Service Identification Band sat pale gray laminate, 3 centimeters wide, the serial number faded on the inner edge after 3 years of wear, was already beginning to register the weight in the way it does in the 3rd hour of a long service. I adjusted the carry. I moved into the east table circuit and began the round. The Navigator Sovereign was at the far end of the hall when I entered. I had seen her image in the function briefing packet. Every Corps member assigned to a sovereign function receives a one-page reference card for the primary dignitary. Photograph, identifying physical details, any relevant protocol notes. Hers had read, Savarvel Kethasavar, Navigator Sovereign, Primary House, 41 years of age. Tall, deep indigo skin, the color of the sky at the precise moment before true dark. Silver-white hair dressed in the Velasavar ceremonial arrangement, which involves specific quantities of flat braided and unbraided sections, whose significance I did not understand then, and do not fully understand now. Pale gray eyes, which is unusual for primary house Velasavar, whose eyes typically run amber gold. The protocol note on her card said 2 words, full honors, no further guidance. The Corps trains its members not to require further guidance. She was standing at the northern end of the center aisle in her ceremonial robes, and she was not moving. The robes were extraordinary in the way that primary house ceremonial garments are always extraordinary, which is to say they made everything else in the room look provisional. Deep indigo silk with copper thread border work at every edge, the Navigator Sovereign's house sigil embroidered at the shoulder in a thread that caught the morning light from the mineral stone panels and returned it at a slightly different angle, so that it seemed to shift as she breathed. She wore the sovereign's formal headdress, which added another 15 centimeters to her already considerable height, and which I later learned weighs roughly 4 kilograms. At 41 years she carried it as if she had been born wearing it, which in every practical sense she had. Her hands were at her sides. Her chin was level. Everything about her physical presentation was exactly correct, and everything about the quality of her stillness said that being exactly correct was costing her something significant this morning. She was surrounded by her household delegation on both sides. The delegations were arranged along the center aisle in precise order of precedence, running back from the ceremony platform toward the south entrance. The groom's delegation, the household of Veth Karen Orvath, navigator commander of the Eastern Transit Corridor, and the political architect of the match that this ceremony was designed to formalize, occupied the right side of the aisle. His household was larger and louder and dressed in the deep burgundy of the Kethvaran Eastern Transit houses, and several of his senior household members had the particular quality of stillness that says a person is watching something they believe they have already won. They had positioned themselves in the front row of their delegation, with the specific visibility of people who have been waiting a long time for a specific morning, and want the room to register that they know it has arrived. I moved through the pre-ceremony service. Tray level, glass to the correct position at the corner of the correct place setting, small nod of acknowledgement if a delegate made eye contact, no speaking unless spoken to, and then only the Corps standard response protocols. I worked the east table from south to north. The acoustics of the hall were remarkable, a space that size should have buzzed with the sound of 300 people finding their places, but the stone absorbed it, redistributing the energy into that low continuous tone that I had noticed when I entered, and that did not change no matter how full the room became. It was not silence. It was a room that knew how to hold what happened inside it. I was 3/4 up the east table when I first got close enough to see the Navigator Sovereign's face clearly. She was doing what I would later understand was the hardest thing she had done in many years of doing hard things. She was holding her expression absolutely still. Not composed. Composed implies a person who has settled into a state of calm, who has resolved the distance between what she feels and what she shows, and arrived somewhere stable. She was doing something different. She was holding the surface of her face in place by an act of continuous, quiet will, the way you hold a heavy door closed against the wind, not by leaning, but by staying exactly where you are and not moving. The jaw slightly too set, the hinges of it visible in a way they would not be if she were at rest. The gray eyes not quite focused on the ceremony platform ahead of her, looking instead at a point roughly 2 meters in front of her feet, which is where a person looks when she is keeping the surface of her face from telling the room what is happening beneath it. The child was at her side. I had not been told there would be a child. The function briefing packet had included the Navigator Sovereign's household party roster, 7 senior household officials, 2 escort guards, 1 protocol officer. No child listed. This child was perhaps 9 or 10 seasons by Velocivar reckoning, which I have since been told puts her at roughly 7 years in Federation standard, though the core training materials on Velocivar developmental stages are frankly inadequate, and I am working largely from context. She had her mother's indigo skin, but lighter, not the deep tone of the primary house at full sovereignty, but the softer shade of a child still growing into her coloring. Her eyes were amber gold, the house standard, large and watchful in the way that Velocivar children's eyes always are when they are in a room full of adults conducting proceedings the adults consider very important. Her hair was arranged in a small version of the formal ceremonial style, the braided and unbraided sections precise enough that someone who knew what they were doing had arranged them, and someone had placed the house sigil pin at her left shoulder. She was holding her mother's right hand. Not in the loose way of a child who has been told to hold a parent's hand and is complying without enthusiasm. In the way a child holds on when she understands, at whatever level a 9-season-old understands such things, that the holding matters. Both her hands around the Navigator Sovereign's right hand, her small fingers overlapping, her body turned slightly toward her mother's side as if she had decided at some recent point that this was her station and she intended to remain at it. Her expression was serious and watchful, and she was taking in the room with the amber gold eyes in a way that was systematic, not anxious, methodical. She was cataloging. The Navigator Sovereign did not look at her. She was looking at the 2 meters of floor in front of her feet, but her right hand, the one the child was holding, was not loose. It was not the hand of a person who had been grabbed and had not yet gotten around to extracting herself. The fingers were curved just enough, just present enough, receiving without announcing. It was the hand of someone who was taking something offered and not performing the taking. I completed the east table circuit and fell back into the service line. The 4-person core rotation for a function of this scale runs on a fixed pattern: 2 circuit carriers, 1 fixed station, 1 passage manager. I was second carrier. I rejoined the circuit, moved to the second position, which takes you along the center aisle's west side on a line running roughly parallel to the procession, and continued the round. This brought me closer. Let me say plainly what I am trying to get at, and why it is difficult to say. I have served 9 years of functions, and I have learned a vocabulary for the states of rooms. I know what a room looks like when it is tense, and what it looks like when it is merely formal. I know what a negotiation looks like when both parties have privately agreed before they sat down, and what it looks like when they have not. I know what grief looks like in people who are not permitted to show it in the settings where I work, and I know what relief looks like in the same people, and I know the particular quality of attention that belongs to a person in a room who is watching something unfold with a stake in its outcome that is not the stated stake. The Navigator Sovereign had been holding her expression still since the far end of the hall. The child had been holding her mother's hand since before I entered the room and would continue to hold it until the procession began, and even then she did not let go all at once. And the 3 senior household members in the front row of the Navigator Commander's delegation had been watching the Navigator Sovereign in the particular way that people watch something they believe is already settled. This was a room in which something was being concluded over the objection of the person at the center of it, and the conclusion was going to happen regardless, and the room knew it, and the Navigator Sovereign knew it, and her child knew it, and the child was 9 or 10 seasons old, and she was doing the only thing available to her, which was to hold on. I noticed all of this, and I moved through the circuit, and I kept the tray level, and I was the furniture. The ceremony master stepped onto the platform. The room settled into its formal position. The navigator sovereign and the navigator commander began the procession walk. The Velocivar formal procession covers the length of the center aisle at a pace that takes approximately 4 minutes. There is no music. The only sound is the particular resonance of the hall and the soft percussion of formal footwear on polished stone. The navigator commander walked on the left side of the aisle at the regulation, half-pace behind and beside the navigator sovereign, which under Velocivar dynastic protocol represents the approach position of a party entering a sovereign compact. His face was carefully pleasant. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with the copper-toned skin of the Eastern Transit House secondary lines and amber eyes that looked at the ceremony platform with comfortable certainty. He had arranged this match over several years through means that were technically available to him, and that the navigator sovereign had run out of instruments to counter. He had been thorough. The comfortable certainty on his face was the certainty of a thorough man in the final stage of a thorough plan. The child walked on the navigator sovereign's right side. I know now that this was irregular, and that the irregularity was intentional, and that it was a statement in Velocivar ceremonial language that every member of the navigator commander's delegation in the front row understood, and that none of them moved to address because addressing it would have required acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would have required having a response to it, and there was no clean response available. I did not know this at the time. I was the furniture. I held the tray. I watched. They were approximately 6 meters from me when the navigator sovereign's pace changed. It was not a stop. It was not a stumble. It was a hesitation of perhaps 1 full second, a fractional reduction in the forward momentum of the procession, the kind of thing that in a different context would not register at all. The navigator commander did not notice it or chose not to. The household delegations were looking at the platform. The other corps members were watching their circuits and the fixed station. I noticed it because I was watching the navigator sovereign, and I was watching the navigator sovereign because the quality of her stillness from the far end of the hall had not been the kind of stillness I could stop attending to. Her gray eyes moved from the ceremony platform. They moved to me. I want to be careful here, because I have told this part wrong a few times in the attempt to tell it right. She did not look at me the way a person looks at another person when she has decided something about him. She did not know me. I was the furniture. What she looked at was the position I occupied, a fixed point at the side of the aisle, not belonging to either delegation, not watching the platform with the focused attention of someone who had arranged to be here and was satisfied with how it was proceeding. I was the thing in the room that was not part of the ceremony, and was not watching the ceremony with any stake in its outcome. What she looked at was something outside it. For 1 second, then she looked back at the platform and continued walking. They passed me. The navigator commander was on the far side of the aisle, 3 meters out. As they passed, I had a clear line of sight to the child. She was still holding her mother's right hand with both of hers, and as she came level with me, her amber gold eyes moved from the ceremony platform to my face. I gave her the small nod. The Corps training covers this. For child dignitaries at formal functions, a brief nod of acknowledgement, not a bow, not a smile, not an intrusion. I see you, I am not a threat, I am the furniture and the furniture is not hostile. I have given this nod perhaps 40 times in 9 years of functions, and it has never lasted more than a moment before the child looks away. She looked at me for 2 full seconds, which is a long time, measured against the pace of a formal procession, and measured against every other time I have given that nod and had it received. Her expression was the same one she had been wearing since I first saw her at the far end of the hall, serious, methodical, taking me in as a piece of data about the room that she had not yet fully accounted for. Then she looked back at the ceremony platform and continued with her mother. They reached the steps. The navigator commander took his position on the left side of the platform. The ceremony master began the formal address. The navigator sovereign stood at the base of the 3 steps, right hand still held by the child, and I watched her absorb the first sentences of the ceremony address with the same quality of controlled stillness she had been carrying since I first saw her. The core service protocol for the ceremony phase of a sovereign function is straightforward. Position at the east and west walls, trays at rest position, no movement unless a delegate at the wall tables requires refreshment. I moved to my position at the east wall, set the tray to the rest position, and stood. The formal address for a sovereign compact of this class runs approximately 20 minutes. The ceremony master spoke in the Velocivar primary house register, which I do not speak beyond basic service phrases, so I was not following the content. I was watching the room the way the core training teaches: sweep, register, sweep again. Every 30 seconds, a full read of the room's surface. Note any movement, note any change in the quality of attention, note anything that departs from the expected. Tray level. Stay at the wall. The navigator sovereign was at the base of the ceremony steps, approximately 12 meters from where I stood. She was still holding the child's hands. Or rather, the child was still holding her right hand with both of hers, and they had not separated during the transition from procession to ceremony position. And the ceremony master was continuing his address, and the navigator commander on the first step above them was facing forward in formal position, and the 3 household members in the front row of his delegation were watching the navigator sovereign with the particular attention of people who are waiting for a specific moment to arrive. The ceremony address is a recitation. I know its structure now from the briefing materials the Corps updated after this function, but at the time I knew only the shape of it from the way the room responded to it. A long formal section establishing the terms, followed by a series of acknowledgments from the joining parties, culminating in the passage where the ceremony master pauses and the parties ascend together to the platform level. The pause is a formal hinge. I did not know this. I watched the room, and I watched the navigator sovereign standing at the base of the steps with the child's hands around hers, and I watched the child watching everything else, and I waited. The ceremony master reached the passage. He paused. Under Velocivar compact ceremony, this pause is the moment at which the joining party on the platform turns to receive the ascending sovereign, the gesture of welcome, and also the moment at which the sovereign is expected to release any informal hold and ascend alone, because the ascent in this ceremony is the declaration of unencumbered choice. The political architecture of the thing requires that the ascending party arrive at the platform level without visible attachment to anything or anyone who stands below it. The ceremony master had reached the formal pause. He had stopped speaking. The room had the quality of held breath. The navigator commander turned. He looked at his intended navigator sovereign. He looked at the child beside her. He looked at the child's hands. His face did the thing that careful faces do when they are deciding, in real time, which of several available expressions to produce. He settled on the pleasant one, which was the correct choice because it was the only choice that kept the ceremony moving forward. His household members in the front row did not look pleasant. They looked like people doing rapid arithmetic on available responses and finding the totals unsatisfactory. The navigator sovereign did not move. The child looked up at her mother. The navigator sovereign looked down at the child. The gray eyes that had been holding at the 2 meters of floor position for most of the ceremony came down to the child's face and stayed there. The child's amber gold eyes were direct. They were not asking. They were stating something that a 9-season-old had decided and was communicating in the only language available to her, which was the language of a child holding onto a parent's hand and looking up at her with full attention. 4 seconds. I counted them because the room had stopped, because the ceremony master had paused, because the navigator commander was holding his position on the first step with the expression of a man maintaining a pleasant face at significant cost, and because the 3 household members in the front row had gone very still in the way of people who are about to need to say something. The navigator sovereign looked up. Her gray eyes swept the room. Not the focused sweep of someone looking for a specific thing, but the wider, flat movement of someone who is locating herself in a space, registering where everything is, what is moving and what is not, what belongs to the ceremony and what is simply present in the room outside of it. The sweep moved past me, stopped, came back. She looked at me for the second time. And then she was walking, not to the steps, across the aisle. She moved with the same quality of deliberate evenness that she had carried since the far end of the hall, not hurrying, not hesitating, the ceremonial headdress absolutely level, the robes carrying the morning light from the mineral panels as she moved through it. The child came with her, both small hands still around her mother's right, keeping the pace without difficulty, her amber gold eyes fixed ahead of them on the east wall, on me. They crossed the 12 meters. The room did not move. The navigator sovereign stopped in front of me. I did not know what to do. There is no core training protocol for this situation. There is a protocol for if a dignitary addresses you directly during a ceremony, respond briefly, defer, return to rest position. But this was not that. This was the primary dignitary of a sovereign compact ceremony standing in front of a hospitality corps member during the formal pause of her own ceremony, which is not a circumstance the training annex had seen fit to prepare me for. I held the tray, I held it level. I was the furniture, and the furniture held its tray. The navigator sovereign reached out with her left hand. She took hold of my right wrist. Not the tray hand, the right hand, the free one which had been at my side. Her fingers closed around the gray service identification band and the wrist inside it. Her grip was not hard. It was not the grip of someone seizing something or testing something. It was the grip of someone who has decided to hold a specific thing and is going to hold it straightforwardly without performance in either direction. The child at her right side watched this. She had released none of the hold on her mother's right hand. Her amber gold eyes moved from her mother's left hand on my wrist to my face and then back again, and the expression she wore was still the methodical one, the cataloging one, but there was something else in it now too. Something that looked like recognition of a category of information she had been collecting all morning and had not yet had enough data to name. The navigator sovereign looked at me. Her gray eyes were level with mine. She was taller than me by perhaps 5 centimeters, and the ceremonial headdress added another 15, and she was the navigator sovereign of the primary house of the Velocivar people, and she was holding onto the wrist of a Federation hospitality worker in core whites, and her expression was not asking. It was not performing distress. It was not making an argument or issuing a statement. It was the expression of someone who has decided to do a specific thing, and is doing it, and would like the thing she is holding to remain where it is. I remained where I was. The room had gone entirely quiet, not the absorbed resonance quiet of the formal ceremony, but the different quiet of a room in which something has happened that no one has yet decided how to respond to. The ceremony master had not spoken. The navigator commander was still on the first step, his pleasant expression having resolved into something less managed and less pleasant, the face of a thorough man encountering an element he had not made thorough provision for. The 3 senior household members in the front row had their heads together in the low, rapid exchange of people who are revising a plan that was, until approximately 45 seconds ago, fully settled. The navigator sovereign's household delegation behind her was absolutely still, the kind of still that belongs to people waiting to find out what they are supposed to do. The core members at the west wall were, I could tell from the peripheral quality of my awareness, experiencing significant professional confusion. Nobody moved. I held the tray. I held it level. The service identification band was warm under her hand. My right wrist was in the grip of the navigator sovereign, and my left hand held a tray of 16 glasses of amber wine, and I was standing at the east wall of the Velocivar Grand Ceremonial Hall during the formal pause of a sovereign compact ceremony. And I did not know the law, and I did not know the ceremony, and I did not know what any of this meant in the language of the great houses of the Velocivar primary line. I knew that a woman whose face had been holding itself together by force since the far end of the hall had walked across an aisle to hold onto my wrist. I knew that a child with amber gold eyes was standing at her side, watching what the adults in the room were going to do. The thing I was capable of offering in that moment was simply to not move, and so that is what I did. She held on for 47 seconds. I know this because the function debrief recorded it later, and I was given the number and I believe it, though from the inside those 47 seconds had the quality of a much longer span of time. The quality that time takes on in moments when a great deal is happening at very low volume, and you are in the middle of it without the language to understand it. The ceremony master did not speak. The navigator commander did not step down from the platform. The three household members in the front row continued their rapid revision. The child released her mother's right hand. I noticed this first from the shift in the navigator sovereign's right side, the slight change in posture that happens when a counterweight is removed, the shoulder settling millimeters lower. I looked down. The child had let go. She had taken one step forward and was standing between her mother and the east wall, facing back toward the ceremony platform with her feet set at shoulder width in the deliberate standing posture of a Velocivar child who has been instructed in formal position and is applying it with complete intention. Her hands were at her sides. Her chin was level. Her amber gold eyes were on the navigator commander. She was 9 or 10 seasons old, and she had placed herself there. The navigator sovereign looked down at her. I am not going to try to describe precisely what happened in the navigator sovereign's face in the moment she looked down at her child, standing between her and the east wall with her feet at shoulder width. I do not have the right language for it, and I am not sure the right language exists in any register I have access to. I will say that the quality of held stillness she had been carrying since the far end of the hall, the controlled, willed, continuous holding of the surface against what was underneath it shifted, not into something visible, into something that had less cost. The way a piece of structural work sounds different when the load on one side is relieved, not because it speaks, but because the tension in it changes and you can hear the change if you are standing close enough. She looked back at me. She said something. 6 or 7 syllables in the primary house register, spoken low and even, her voice the same instrument she had been using to hold the expression with but now saying the one thing it needed to say. I do not speak that register. I understood none of the words. I understood that it was not a request, not a question, not a declaration to the room. It was the specific register of an acknowledgement, the formal kind that requires a witness. The kind spoken when a person needs a record of a thing to exist somewhere, even if the only place it exists is in the ear of a man holding a tray at the east wall of your wedding hall. I nodded, the core nod, the furniture nod. I see you, I am not a threat. The same nod I had given the child 40 minutes earlier at the procession. It was the only vocabulary I had for the moment, and I gave it to her in full. She released my wrist. She straightened. The headdress found its level. She looked at the child. The child looked at her mother for one measured moment, the amber gold eyes completing whatever record they were making, and then turned and walked to the navigator sovereign's household delegation and took up a position beside the protocol officer at the front of the group. Her hands at her sides, her posture absolutely correct, her face forward. The navigator sovereign walked to the ceremony steps. She ascended alone. She stood beside the navigator commander on the first step, and the ceremony master found his place in the address and continued, and the sound of the room came back up around the proceedings, and the 3 senior household members in the front row settled back into their positions with the carefully managed expressions of people putting something away to be dealt with later, and the function proceeded. I stood at the east wall. I held the tray. I was the furniture. The service identification band on my left wrist was warm where her hand had been, and I kept the tray level, and I did not think about anything except the tray, until the circuit called me back into motion and I went. The ceremony concluded 40 minutes after that. The reception followed. 300 people and the particular momentum of a formal post-ceremony function, which is its own kind of river. It moves in a specific direction and the core members are in it and around it, and we do not direct it, we serve it. I carried the tray through the reception service. I kept the glasses full. I did not look at the navigator sovereign or the child more than the circuit took me past them. Because looking would have been a violation of a discretion, I was already deeply inside and had been since the 47 seconds at the east wall. And the Corps expects its members to honor that discretion in the aftermath of unusual events, especially when, the unusual event is still in the room. The child found me in the second hour of the reception. I was at the fixed refreshment station on the east wall, managing the circuit handoff with my colleague Vin, when I became aware of a small presence at my left side. I looked down. The child was standing there between the station and the wall, which put her out of the direct line of sight of the main reception floor. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her amber gold eyes were direct and serious and entirely focused. She spoke, in the primary house register, which I do not have. She spoke for perhaps 30 seconds, pausing twice in a deliberate way that said she had thought out what she wanted to say and was delivering it carefully, checking at each pause to confirm I was following. When she finished, she looked at me and waited with the particular patience of someone who has extended a courtesy and expects it to be received. I said in Corps Standard Velocivar, the only complete sentence I was confident in for this situation. I don't understand. I'm sorry. She considered this for a moment. She nodded once, which I took to mean she had expected this and had prepared for it. Then she reached into the front panel of her formal court garment, a small interior pocket that I would not have known to look for, and produced a stone. Flat, smooth, pale gray, with a single white diagonal vein running from the upper left corner to the lower right. Not much bigger than my thumbnail. She held it out to me on both palms, the formal Velocivar gesture for an offering given without condition. I did not know what it meant. I know now. It is the Velos stone giving. A child of the Velocivar primary house gives the stone to the person she intends to hold to. The household relationship created by the gesture is permanent under the founding articles. It places the recipient in a documented relational category with the giving house. It is irrevocable except by the giver's own act. A child of the Navigator Sovereign's daughter line has given fewer than a dozen Velos stones in the last 4 centuries that were not instruments of political arrangement. This one was not. The Navigator Sovereign's daughter line had watched her mother hold onto a service worker's wrist for 47 seconds and then walk up 3 stairs and enter a compact she had not chosen. And she was 9 or 10 seasons old, and she had decided, in the methodical, careful way she had approached everything she looked at all morning, that the person at the east wall was the person she was going to give the stone to. I did not know any of this. I know how to receive an offering. The Corps training covers formal gifting protocols across 14 Velocivar house traditions, and the 2-palmed presentation is one of them, and the correct response is the 2-palmed receive with a formal head incline. I brought my hands together, palms up, and she placed the stone in them, and I inclined my head in the formal acknowledgement. She held my eyes for 3 more seconds, the amber gold eyes, precise and serious, completing the last entry in whatever record she was keeping. Then she turned and walked back through the reception to her mother's side. I watched her take up the position she had been maintaining all morning, at the Navigator Sovereign's right close, both small hands clasped in front of her now rather than extended in the hold of the procession, standing in a formal post-ceremony position. But close, still close. I put the stone in the interior pocket of my Corps jacket, beside the identification papers and the function briefing packet. I finished the function. I completed the debrief with the Corps supervisor, who asked standard questions and received standard answers, and I took the transport back to the staff annex, and I sat on the edge of my bunk for a while in the dark with the stone in my hand, turning it in my fingers. The white vein runs diagonally, smooth on both faces and the edges. It had been carried in a pocket before mine. There was that quality of wear to it that says a small, smooth object has been handled frequently, and for a while the edges slightly softer than the faces, the vein slightly polished at its center. Someone had been carrying it. It had been ready to give. I filed the standard post-function incident report the next morning. The Corps requires one for any event involving direct contact between service personnel and the primary dignitary beyond standard service protocol. I described the event in the factual terms available to me. Navigator Sovereign gripped service workers' right wrist during ceremony phase. Duration 47 seconds per function record. No injury, no service disruption. Function continued without further incident. My supervisor read it, stamped it with the function number, filed it. He looked at me over the desk for a moment afterward and said, "You know what that was?" And I said no. And he said, "Neither do I." And that was the end of the institutional account of it. I learned more about the Velas stone giving 3 months later from a Velosivar cultural briefing document. The Corps updated after a household relations consultation with the Kethasa primary house. The document included a section on informal bonding gestures and their legal weight under the Velosivar founding articles. I read the section twice. Then I sat with it for a while, and I took the stone out of the interior pocket of my work jacket. I had moved it there permanently after the function, which was not something I made a decision about so much as something that happened and I did not reverse, and I looked at it. A Velas stone given by a child of the Navigator Sovereign's daughter line carries the full weight of Primary House Association under the founding statute. The recipient is placed in a documented category. There are obligations on both sides, and there are protections on both sides, and the record exists in the Velosivar founding archive and does not close. The giver must be of sufficient capacity to make the gesture with intention, which a 9-season-old primary house child is considered to be. The association is irrevocable except by the giver's own act. She is 11 seasons old now. I have not heard from the Navigator Sovereign's household in the 18 months since the function. I have not been assigned to another Velosivar primary house engagement, and I have not requested one, because I am not certain what protocol governs a Corps member who carries a Velas stone in his jacket pocket, and the briefing materials do not address it, and I have not asked. I carry the stone. I go to functions. I hold the tray. I keep the glasses full. I am the furniture most of the time, and the furniture does not speculate about the great houses or dynastic compacts entered on ceremony platforms 3 shallow steps high in halls carved with 4,000 years of record. I am not qualified to think about those things, and I know it. I have a freight hauling background, a service certification, and 9 years of knowing how to stand still in rooms where important things are happening and not exist. What I know is this. The Navigator Sovereign of the primary house was standing at the base of 3 steps with her child's hands around her right hand, and a ceremony proceeding above her that had been arranged to take from her something she had not offered. She had held her face together since the far end of the hall. She had walked the procession with her child at her right side, which was irregular and which she had done without apology. And at the moment when the ceremony required her to release whatever she was holding and ascend alone, she had looked across the room at the fixed point that was not part of the ceremony, and she had walked to it. Not to me. I am precise about this. She was not holding on to me. I was the fixed point, the thing in the room that was not watching the platform with the attention of someone who had arranged the proceedings or had a stake in their outcome. I was the furniture, and the furniture was present without wanting anything from the ceremony, and that is what she held on to. A moment's contact with something outside the room's logic. and her child had stood between her mother and the east wall with her feet at shoulder width and her hands at her sides. And then she had given me a stone that she had been carrying in a pocket in a formal court garment that had a pocket specifically for carrying it. She had been carrying it when she arrived. I turn the stone in my fingers sometimes when I think about that part. The smoothness of the edges, the wear at the center of the white vein. She had it ready. A 9-season-old primary house child, at her mother's wedding, carrying a Velas stone in the pocket of her ceremonial garment because she had decided before she arrived that the morning was going to require her to give it to someone, and she did not know who it would be, and she waited all morning until she did. I do not know what happened after the function, in the sense that matters. I know the public record. The Navigator Compact was formalized on the 14th day of the 4th month. The Navigator Sovereign's household relocated to the joint residence compound at Keth Varen 3 weeks later. The political architecture held. The thorough man's thorough plan concluded in the way thorough plans do. I do not know what the Navigator Sovereign said to her daughter that evening. I do not know what the child said back. I do not know whether the 47 seconds at the east wall became something that the household spoke of or something that it kept. I do not know whether the Navigator Sovereign knows what the Velas stone means as it sits in my jacket pocket, or whether knowing would mean anything to her at this distance, or whether the distance is the point. The stone is still there. I check for it sometimes at the start of a function shift, the way I check for my core identification and the briefing packet and the band on my left wrist. The flat smooth weight of it in the interior pocket. The white vein under my thumb, diagonal, upper left to lower right, worn at the center to a faint brightness. She was carrying it when she arrived. That is the part I keep coming back to. Not the 47 seconds, those I understand well enough, in the limited way that furniture understands the things that happen in rooms. But the stone, carried ready in a small interior pocket in a formal court garment on the morning of her mother's wedding, by a 9-season-old primary house child who waited with methodical amber gold attention until the moment she knew who to give it to. She looked at me for 2 full seconds in the procession. She filed me. She waited for the 47 seconds at the east wall and whatever they told her. Then she found me in the second hour of the reception and gave me the stone she had been carrying all morning, and she held my eyes for 3 more seconds when she placed it in my hands, and then she went back to her mother's side and stood close. I hold the tray. I keep the glasses full. I am invisible mostly in the rooms where I work. The stone is in the pocket. It is always still there.